A silent battlefield. How one detail changed the war. Have you ever felt like you're standing before an insurmountable wall with all your efforts crashing against it? Imagine spending years preparing for battle, meticulously planning every detail, crafting a perfect defense, only to have all your plans crumble in an instant due to something utterly unexpected. What if there was a secret capable of turning any situation around, even when all odds seem stacked against you? How can you win when the enemy appears invincible and their fortifications impenetrable? And what if the secret was so simple that you'd never guess it until it was too late? Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. On February 19th, 1945, 8 miles southeast of Japan, on Iwo Jima, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stood in his command bunker, surrounded by 3-foot-thick walls of reinforced concrete. Above him, 500 identical strongholds honeycombed the volcanic rock, each designed to withstand the heaviest American bombardments. For months, Allied shells had pounded these bunkers. Direct hits, which could have leveled entire buildings, barely scratched their surface. Japanese soldiers called them invincible. American Marines called them death traps. Every frontal assault ended the same way. Waves of Marines cut down before they could reach the bunker entrances. The math was brutal and simple. 20,000 Japanese defenders, unlimited ammunition, perfect fields of fire. But that morning, something rolled onto the black sand beaches that was not in any Japanese intelligence report. 8 M4A3 Sherman tanks. They looked ordinary, except for one detail the defenders couldn't discern from their concrete fortresses. These tanks weren't carrying shells. They carried compressed napalm fuel cylinders, 100 yards of liquid fire on demand. The Japanese had built a perfect defense against everything they knew about American warfare. They had no idea the Marines were about to completely change the rules. And this was just the beginning of a turning point. The pre-dawn gloom of February 19th, 1945, enveloped Iwo Jima in a deceptive calm. Captain David Shoup crouched in a cramped landing craft, studying intelligence photographs one last time. The images showed what Allied command called the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific. A volcanic island transformed into a concrete fortress. 500 pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements carved into the rock and reinforced with steel. Each position was connected to others, creating overlapping fields of fire that could scythe down attacking forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Shoup folded the photographs and tucked them into his field jacket. Around him, Marines of K Company checked their weapons with the mechanical precision of men who understood the odds. The preliminary bombardment had been the heaviest in the history of the Pacific Theater. 74 days of continuous shelling that had turned the island's surface into a moonscape of craters. Yet, aerial reconnaissance revealed a disturbing truth. The bunkers remained intact. 3 feet of reinforced concrete had withstood punishment that would have leveled entire city blocks. 800 yards offshore, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi emerged from his command bunker to survey the American fleet gathering in the pre-dawn twilight. 900 vessels stretched across the horizon, their silhouettes black against the starry sky. Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing for this moment. transforming Iwo Jima into what he believed was an impregnable fortress. His engineers had dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting defensive positions, allowing troops to move unseen between bunkers. Artillery pieces were nestled in caves carved deep into the volcanic rock, protected from counter-battery fire by tons of stone overhead. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Japanese general had meticulously studied American tactics during his previous assignment in the United States. He understood their preference for overwhelming firepower followed by a direct infantry assault. His defensive system was designed to neutralize both advantages. The bunkers were meant to endure the bombardment, then mow down infantry attacks with concentrated machine gun and artillery fire. Simple, proven, mathematically sound. But what if there was a way to circumvent this seemingly flawless logic? The answer lay in something Kuribayashi couldn't foresee. At 09 Munzer, the engines of the landing craft roared. Shoop felt the deck vibrate beneath his boots as the Higgins boat surged toward the black sand beaches. The preliminary bombardment had ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the sound of diesel engines and churning water. Intelligence estimates predicted the Marines faced the bloodiest assault in the Corps' history. Standard tactics called for an artillery preparation, followed by an infantry advance supported by conventional tank fire. However, as it turned out, this was merely a familiar beginning, masking a radical rule change that was about to shock everyone, and we'll tell you how this change manifested itself next. Every Marine in the landing craft understood the brutal arithmetic of bunker warfare. Attackers required overwhelming numerical superiority to overcome fortified positions. The first wave reached the beach at 09:30. Machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions, mowing down Marines before they could advance past the waterline. Mortar shells rained down with deadly accuracy across the landing zone. Each explosion sent geysers of black sand and shrapnel through the ranks. Shoop watched as his men dove for cover behind scattered debris, pinned down 50 yards from the surf. The bunkers had withstood the bombardment, exactly as Kuribayashi predicted. From his command post, the Japanese general tracked radio transmissions with grim satisfaction. His defensive plan was working perfectly. American casualties mounted, while his own forces remained protected in their concrete shelters. Overlapping fields of fire prevented any significant advance, forcing Marines to cluster in kill zones where artillery could devastate entire units. This was the battle Kuribayashi had prepared for. A grueling war of attrition that would bleed the Americans dry. But it was at this very moment, when victory seemed imminent, that completely new players entered the battlefield. Players who would entirely change the course of events, and of whom Kuribayashi could not even conceive. But there was something new about this assault. Behind the initial waves of infantry, 8 unusual Sherman tanks rolled off specialized landing craft onto the volcanic sand. These M4A3s appeared identical to standard armor from a distance, but closer inspection revealed critical modifications. Where conventional tanks mounted 75mm guns, these machines carried flamethrower equipment connected to massive fuel tanks. The flamethrower mechanism could project burning liquid 100 yards, far enough to reach bunker entrances from positions outside the effective range of small arms fire. And it was this seemingly insignificant detail that was about to become the key to dismantling an impregnable defense, leading to completely unexpected consequences. The quiet fury of the Marines. Do you remember those moments when there seemed to be no way out? When, despite all your efforts, the enemy remained unyielding and every step forward turned into a painful retreat. That was precisely the feeling that gripped the Marines on the Pacific Islands, facing impregnable Japanese bunkers. But what if there was a weapon capable of instantly transforming these indestructible fortresses into blazing infernos, sowing terror and despair among the enemy ranks? How did this become possible? And most importantly, how did it change the course of the war, when even the most seasoned generals suddenly felt the cold touch of doubt? Prepare to learn a story that will make you rethink the art of war and human ingenuity. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sergeant Walter Lutz, commander of the lead Flamethrower tank, was at the heart of the steel monster. His crew, squeezed into the cramped space, was surrounded by 400 gallons of napalm fuel, pressurized at 800 pounds per square inch. These machines, nicknamed a quote 17 by the Marines, a biting reference to the popular lighter, were the result of intense training. Lutz had thoroughly mastered the flame-throwing system, learning to perfectly coordinate fuel delivery and ignition timing for maximum destructive effect. Despite its effectiveness against fortified positions, this weapon carried immense risks. Each tank with its fuel tanks became a potential bomb, and its limited range required crews to advance into the thick of enemy fire. The Japanese defenders, until this moment, had never encountered flamethrower tanks. Their intelligence reports contain no mention of such armored vehicles, and their defensive positions were designed to counter conventional artillery and small arms. As Lutz's tank began its advance toward the first bunker complex, the machine gunners inside the concrete fortress prepared to engage what they believed was a standard Sherman. They had already repelled dozens of similar attacks, using proven tactics, waiting for the tank to approach close range, then concentrating fire on observation slits and tracks. But at 75 yards from the bunker, Lutz gave the order to fire. A stream of burning fuel erupted from the flamethrower nozzle, arcing through the morning air like liquid lightning. The napalm struck the bunker's embrasure and surged inside, instantly filling the concrete chamber with flames reaching temperatures over 2000 degrees. The Japanese soldiers inside had no time to escape or even comprehend what was happening. The reinforced concrete that had protected them from artillery shells became a merciless furnace, trapping superheated air and toxic smoke. In a matter of seconds, the supposedly impregnable position was neutralized. The Marines who had previously been pinned down by dense machine gun fire from that bunker suddenly found they could advance. However, the psychological impact surpassed any tactical advantage. Across the battlefield, Japanese defenders watched in horror as their strongest positions erupted in flames. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives proved utterly helpless against this new weapon. General Kuribayashi received the first reports with disbelief. Bunkers that had withstood months of bombardment were being destroyed in seconds by individual tanks. His meticulously constructed defensive system, based on proven principles of fortification warfare, was crumbling under the assault of a weapon he had never seen or even imagined. The Americans had changed the very fundamental nature of bunker warfare, and his preparation suddenly seemed completely inadequate. For the first time since arriving on Iwo Jima, the Japanese general felt the cold touch of doubt. But how was this terrible and effective machine born? Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The concept of mounting flamethrowers on tanks arose not from strategic planning, but from desperate necessity. 6 months prior, Marine Corps engineers at Quantico had anxiously observed the rising infantry casualties during Pacific Island assaults. It became clear that conventional weapons were incapable of effectively neutralizing Japanese bunker systems. Colonel Robert Blake, head of the Marine Corps Equipment Board, authorized experiments with flamethrower systems after reviewing horrific casualty reports from Saipan and Guam. A standard infantry flamethrower had a range of only 40 yards, requiring soldiers to approach within grenade-throwing distance of enemy positions, a tactical impossibility against well-protected bunkers. The solution was to scale existing technology. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had already developed flamethrower equipment for clearing beach obstacles, using pressure-fed fuel systems capable of projecting burning liquid over long distances. Blake's engineers adapted this naval equipment for installation on M4A3 Sherman tanks, creating hybrid machines that combined armored protection with devastating incendiary power. The modification process required removing the tank's 75mm gun and replacing it with a flamethrower nozzle connected to fuel tanks mounted inside the vehicle. But this was only the beginning. Captain Robert McVeigh oversaw the conversion of the first 8 prototype machines at the Major Island Naval Shipyard in December 1944. Each tank carried 400 gallons of napalm fuel, a mixture of gasoline thickened with polystyrene. This particular blend burned longer and adhered to surfaces much more effectively than pure gasoline. The fuel system operated under pressure generated by compressed nitrogen cylinders, allowing crews to project flame up to 100 yards with sufficient accuracy to hit bunker embrasures from relatively safe positions. The flamethrower itself was a true marvel of engineering. The nozzle assembly featured adjustable flow regulators that allowed crews to vary the flame intensity from narrow, precise streams for targeted fire to wide patterns for area effect. Ignition was provided by spark plugs powered by a separate fuel system, ensuring reliable flame generation even in the harshest combat conditions. The entire system could provide continuous fire for 90 seconds or approximately 30 individual bursts, depending on duration and intensity settings. But how were crews to be trained to operate this new, deadly machine? McVeigh insisted on extensive crew training before deploying the machines in combat. Tank crews needed to master not only fuel system operations and flame-throwing techniques, but also tactical employment procedures that differed fundamentally from conventional armored tactics. Unlike standard tanks, which engaged targets at maximum range, flamethrower tanks required close coordination with infantry and careful positioning to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. And here lay a new challenge. The machines were particularly vulnerable to artillery and anti-tank weapons due to their massive fuel reserves and the necessity of operating at relatively short distances. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tank employment evolved through trial and error during training exercises. McVeigh's crews learned to coordinate their attacks with advancing infantry, using conventional tanks for long-range fire support, while flamethrower tanks destroyed specific targets blocking infantry movement. The most effective technique involved approaching bunkers at oblique angles that masked the tank's approach until the final phase of the assault, when speed and surprise could overcome defensive fire. But how exactly did these tactics play out in real battles? And what other horrors did the Sishko 2070 bring to the battlefields? Find out in our next installment. Perhaps you have ever faced a situation where a seemingly impregnable barrier in your path suddenly turned into a blazing hell, opening the way to victory. What is this force? Capable of changing the course of events in an instant, turning a fortress to ashes. And what is the price of such destructive power when it becomes a tool in human hands? Today's story will transport you to battlefields where something similar occurred, and the consequences of this event forever altered the perception of warfare. In this narrative, we will delve into a history where flamethrower tanks played a decisive role, a weapon capable of inspiring primal terror while simultaneously offering hope. You will learn how these machines, whose tactical deployment initially contradicted all established principles, became a key element in the bloodiest battles. We will examine why 8 such tanks found themselves on Iwo Jima, and how their limited number impacted the outcome of an entire operation. And finally, we will witness how one moment, one fiery salvo, changed the fate of an entire defensive position and, perhaps, the course of the war. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sergeant Lutz, whose intuition in flamethrower tactics impressed even his instructors, became a true master of his craft. His crew, Driver Private Johnson, Gunner Corporal Martinez, and Loader Private Davis, honed their assault procedures to such an extent that complex maneuvers were executed without a single word. The coordination among these fighters surpassed anything required in conventional tank operations, as flamethrowing allowed no room for error in timing or positioning. The psychological impact of flamethrower tanks remained unpredictable in training. No exercises could simulate the terror this weapon instilled in enemy soldiers, or the surge of morale it gave to allies when previously impregnable positions suddenly became vulnerable. Intelligence reports from Europe hinted that German troops abandoned their positions rather than face fiery attacks. However, the conditions of the Pacific Theater presented different challenges due to unique Japanese defensive tactics and cultural factors that made surrender extremely rare. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations required extensive support infrastructure. Each such machine consumed fuel at a rate far exceeding that of conventional ammunition. Just one day of combat could completely deplete a tank's fuel tanks, necessitating frequent resupply missions directly under enemy fire. The napalm mixture required specialized handling procedures and storage conditions, significantly complicating field logistics. Furthermore, the compressed nitrogen system needed regular maintenance and pressure checks to ensure reliable operation in combat. Marine Corps doctrine traditionally emphasized firepower and mobility. But flamethrower tanks represented a departure from established tactical principles. These machines sacrificed long-range combat capability and ammunition capacity for a specialized ability to destroy bunkers. Such compromises forced commanders to re-evaluate fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle employment, particularly regarding the interrelationship between tanks and infantry in assault operations. The conventional wisdom held that tanks should provide fire support from positions that maximize their armored protection and gun range. Flamethrower tanks, however, required aggressive positioning, which exposed them to concentrated enemy fire. The decision to deploy only 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima reflected both resource limitations and uncertainty regarding their combat effectiveness. Marine Corps planners allocated limited space for experimental weapons, prioritizing proven systems over unproven innovations. These 8 tanks represented the entire inventory of combat-ready flamethrower vehicles available to Pacific Fleet Marine Forces. Their performance would be crucial for future flamethrower development programs. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The technical specifications for the M4A3 flamethrower variant included armor thickness ranging from 25 to 76 mm depending on the location. This provided protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, but left the vehicle vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and direct artillery hits. The vehicle's weight increased from 33 to 37 tons due to fuel system modifications, which reduced mobility and increased ground pressure on soft surfaces like sand. Engine performance remained adequate for tactical movement, but fuel consumption significantly rose due to the added weight and power requirements of the flamethrower system. The flamethrower nozzle could traverse 30 degrees left or right of the tank's center line, with an elevation adjustment from -10 degrees to +20 degrees. This limited movement required careful positioning to engage targets, as the tank's hull had to be oriented towards the target area before effective flame projection was possible. Crew visibility was restricted compared to conventional tanks due to modifications needed for the fuel system installation, making coordination with supporting infantry essential for situational awareness and target identification. Private First Class Hiroshi Shigeta hunkered down in Bunker Complex 7 Cows, quote Ford, watched as American tanks advanced across the killing field his unit had prepared for months. The concrete walls around him were 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel rebar, and designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns. His Type 96 machine gun was positioned to cover the primary approach route, with interlocking fields of fire from adjacent positions, ensuring no enemy could cross the open ground unscathed. Everything proceeded according to plan until the lead American tank stopped 75 yards away and aimed something other than a gun barrel in his direction. The jet of liquid fire that erupted from Lutz's tank transformed the battlefield in ways no tactical manual had foreseen. Shigeta watched as the burning fuel arced through the air like molten lightning, striking his bunker's firing slit with the force of a dragon's breath. The napalm slammed against the concrete and steel, then flowed through the opening like burning water, instantly filling the chamber with flames reaching temperatures over 2000 degrees. The reinforced walls that had protected him from months of artillery bombardment became a furnace, trapping superheated air and toxic smoke. Shigetta's screams lasted less than 3 seconds before the inferno consumed all the oxygen in the confined space. Captain Shoup observed the bunker's destruction from his position 50 yards behind the tank assault line. The concrete structure that had pinned 2 Marine platoons for 3 hours simply erupted in flame, then fell silent. No more machine gun fire. No more mortar rounds arcing down the beach. A position intelligence had identified as a primary defensive strongpoint was neutralized by a single 8-second burst of flame. Shoup grabbed his radio and called for immediate coordination between the remaining flamethrower tanks and his infantry companies. If this weapon could destroy bunkers so effectively, the entire tactical situation on Iwo Jima was about to change. Silence. The word pierces the air, making everyone who hears it freeze. Around us, there's only the sound of waves crashing on the shore and the distant cries of birds. But don't be fooled by this apparent serenity. Behind it lies something far more sinister, capable of transforming the world into a burning hell in an instant. What if what you considered unbreakable turns out to be just an illusion? What happens when your strongest shelters offer no protection? And most importantly, is this about you? I remember finding myself in a situation where everything I believed in was crumbling before my eyes, when it seemed there was no way out, and every next step led only deeper into the abyss. But it was precisely then, when hope seemed to have faded, that the turning point emerged, changing everything. We've often discussed how important it is to capture attention from the outset and meet expectations. Today, we'll delve into a story that will show how this unfolds on the battlefield, and how one invention changed the course of an entire battle. In this video, we will reveal 3 key aspects that revolutionized the concept of warfare in the Pacific theater. First, you'll discover how a seemingly ordinary tank transformed into a weapon of unprecedented destructive power, capable of annihilating enemy fortifications in mere seconds. Second, we'll show how the psychological effect of this new weapon undermined the morale of an entire army, forcing soldiers to doubt the impregnability of their positions. And third, we'll analyze how the tactical genius of commanders was able to leverage this new weapon to achieve strategic objectives despite emerging challenges. Get ready to learn what you never expected. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The world around changed suddenly and irrevocably. Lutz, the tank commander, instantly adjusted the turret 10 degrees to the left. His gaze focused on a new target, a formidable pillbox containing a 75mm anti-tank gun. This strong point controlled a key route leading deeper into the island. The Japanese fortification was a true fortress. 5 feet of reinforced concrete on all sides, with steel plates covering the gun's embrasure. Conventional tank shells bounced off it harmlessly, and an attempted infantry assault would have been suicidal due to interlocking fire from supporting positions. Lutz ordered his driver to advance another 20 yards, closing the distance to 60 yards. This ensured maximum flame penetration. The anti-tank gun crew inside the pillbox had never encountered flamethrower weapons. Their training focused on identifying armored vehicles and tactics for engaging conventional tanks, where precise aiming and ammunition selection were key. As Lutz's tank approached, the gunner, Corporal Yamamoto, prepared to engage what appeared to be a standard Sherman moving at optimal range. The flamethrower nozzle was not immediately recognizable as a weapon system, and Japanese intelligence had no information on American flamethrower tanks. Yamamoto was adjusting his gun's elevation when the world around him erupted into a fiery hell. A stream of napalm struck the embrasure with astonishing accuracy, surging through the opening and coating every surface inside the pillbox with burning fuel that adhered to concrete, steel, and human flesh with equal mercilessness. The gun crew died instantly, overcome by superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could take a single breath. The 75mm gun, capable of destroying any tank on the battlefield, became a useless pile of metal in a chamber filled with flames that would rage for another 6 hours. The position controlling the central approach to Mount Suribachi was annihilated in less than 10 seconds. What next? And how would this impact the overall strategy? McVeigh, meanwhile, coordinated the advance of the remaining 7 flamethrower tanks across the volcanic beach, directing each vehicle towards specific targets, predetermined in conjunction with infantry commanders. The tactical deployment of flamethrower tanks required careful integration with supporting forces. These vehicles were vulnerable to enemy fire during their approach, necessitating infantry protection to prevent Japanese soldiers from launching close-range attacks with satchel charges or magnetic mines. Coordination proved significantly more challenging than anticipated in training, as radio communication degraded in combat conditions, and smoke from burning positions obscured visual signals. But what would happen when this new weapon encountered an invisible enemy? Fear? The psychological impact of the flamethrower attacks rapidly spread through the Japanese defensive positions across the island. Soldiers who had spent months constructing what they believed were impregnable fortifications watched in horror as their most formidable bunkers erupted in flames and fell silent in seconds. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives offered no protection against a weapon capable of penetrating embrasures like burning water. Radio messages from forward positions described American tanks spewing fire like dragons, creating panic among defenders who had prepared for conventional warfare but were confronted with something beyond their experience and training. How would this affect the High Command? General Kuribayashi tracked the tactical situation from his command bunker deep beneath Mount Suribachi, receiving increasingly desperate radio messages from his forward commanders. The American advance was progressing significantly faster than any scenario his staff had developed. Defensive positions meant to hold for days were falling within hours. Flamethrower tanks were destroying bunkers faster than his reserves could reinforce threatened sectors. His meticulously constructed defensive system, designed to channel American attacks into predetermined killing zones, was collapsing as the tanks burned through the positions that formed the core of his entire strategy. But what to do with such a swift victory? The tactical success of the flamethrower tanks created new challenges for Marine commanders. Infantry companies, which had been pinned down for hours, suddenly found they could rapidly advance across terrain that had been impassable under machine gun fire. The speed of the breakthrough threatened to outpace artillery support and logistical supply, potentially creating isolated pockets of Marines deep within Japanese territory. Shoup coordinated with battalion headquarters to ensure that conventional tanks and artillery could keep pace with the flamethrower tank advance, maintaining mutual support between the different weapon systems. And what about the tanks themselves? How much longer could they last? Private Davis, Lutz's tank loader, supplied compressed nitrogen to the fuel system while monitoring gauges showing the remaining flame-throwing capacity. Each napalm burst consumed approximately 12 gallons of fuel, and the tank's 400-gallon capacity allowed for about 30 individual flamethrower attacks before replenishment was required. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations differed fundamentally from conventional armored operations, as fuel consumption significantly exceeded ammunition consumption. Davis estimated his tank had enough fuel for 6 more bunker attacks before returning to the beach for resupply. But what if the path led not just to a bunker, but to the nerve center of the defense? The third bunker complex targeted by Lutz's tank housed a communications center that coordinated defensive fire for the entire southeastern sector of the island. Japanese radio operators inside the fortified structure maintained contact with artillery batteries located in caves across the volcanic terrain, directing counter-battery fire against American positions and coordinating defensive movements between isolated strongpoints. Destroying this facility would blind Kuribayashi's forces in a critical section of the battlefield, disrupting the command and control system that sustained his defensive network. And now, the moment of truth. Corporal Martinez, the tank's flamethrower system operator, adjusted the projector nozzle for maximum penetration and initiated the ignition sequence. Pilot flames flared, fed by a separate propane system that ensured reliable flame generation in combat conditions. The fuel pressure gauge showed optimal operating parameters, and the traverse mechanism aligned the projector with the target bunker's main communications antenna. Imagine a weapon capable of reducing the most impregnable fortifications to dust with a single fiery breath, changing the course of a battle in minutes. But what if this same weapon, a symbol of your strength, suddenly becomes your Achilles heel, transforming a victorious advance into a deadly trap for those who wield it? How did it happen that a machine designed to destroy found itself on the brink of self-destruction? And what occurs when brilliant tactics clash with an even more sophisticated counter-move? Perhaps you're familiar with the feeling when your greatest advantage turns into your biggest vulnerability. We've also encountered such paradoxes repeatedly. Observing how tools designed for triumph instantly turn against their creators. However, it's in understanding this duality that the key to overcoming the most difficult challenges lies. Today, we'll delve into one such story, where on a battlefield engulfed in flames, the grandeur of victory and the bitterness of defeat intertwined, and we'll learn how a tactical innovation that promised swift success unexpectedly exposed its deadly fragility. In this narrative, we will uncover why the seemingly invincible flamethrower tanks, which crushed enemy bunkers, suddenly became target number one, and how their fuel tanks transformed from a source of destruction into a fatal flaw. Marine Martinez, operating the combat vehicle, pulled the trigger. A powerful jet of napalm, erupting under colossal pressure, soared through 60 yards of volcanic sand before slamming into the bunker entrance with the force of concentrated hellfire. The communications center ignited, flames instantly engulfing every corner of the subterranean structure, irrevocably destroying thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment and eliminating all technical personnel who maintained vital links to Japanese artillery positions scattered across the island. The loss of this single strongpoint shattered defensive coordination across several square miles, condemning isolated bunkers to fight independently without mutual support or coordinated fire missions. The tactical impact of the strike significantly surpassed the physical destruction. General Kuribayashi's ability to react swiftly to American advances steadily deteriorated with each communication node obliterated by flamethrowers' attacks. By 2 p.m., on the first day of the assault, the 8 flamethrower tanks had already annihilated 27 bunkers, strong points, and defensive positions initially designated as primary targets for the entire first week of operations. The breakthrough exceeded all planned estimates, creating opportunities for rapid advancement that threatened to collapse Japanese resistance in the southern part of the island. A weapon previously considered an experimental system proved devastatingly effective against fortifications that just hours earlier had been deemed absolutely impregnable. Stay with us and watch until the end, because the most interesting part is yet to come. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and of course, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. However, the Japanese counterattack was swift, beginning at 5:30 p.m. on February 21st. Kuribayashi's artillery batteries, skillfully hidden in their cave positions, moved out and unleashed concentrated fire on the advancing flamethrower tanks. The general had spent 48 hours meticulously analyzing the new American weapon, and his conclusion was grim for the enemy. The fuel systems of these vehicles represented critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited with accurate artillery fire. His artillery commanders were ordered to prioritize flamethrower tanks over conventional armor, using high-explosive shells specifically designed to breach fuel tanks and create catastrophic secondary explosions. The very first salvo engulfed Lutz's tank as it approached a fortified ridge, sending geysers of volcanic sand and steel shrapnel across the battlefield. Lutz felt the concussion of near misses shake his vehicle as Japanese gunners adjusted their fire on his position. The M4A3 tank's armor could withstand small arms fire and shell fragments, but direct hits from 75 meter artillery would penetrate the hull and ignite the 400 gallons of napalm fuel stored inside. His driver, Private Johnson, performed evasive maneuvers while Lutz, through his periscope, desperately searched for the source of the incoming fire. The Japanese had mastered camouflaging their gun positions with volcanic ash and debris, making counter-battery fire significantly more difficult, even when artillery pieces revealed their location with muzzle flashes. The vulnerability of flamethrower tanks to artillery fire had been identified during training, but real combat conditions proved far more complex and unpredictable than simulations could foresee. Tank crews operating under constant fire faced the unceasing threat of catastrophic fuel explosion, creating psychological stress far exceeding normal combat conditions. The mere knowledge that a single penetrating hit could turn their vehicle into a blazing fireball affected crew performance and tactical decision-making in ways no training could adequately prepare for. Lutz's crew maintained discipline, but the strain of managing a mobile bomb was evident in their tense radio communications and hesitant movements. Once again, remember, stay with us and watch until the end so you don't miss the key moments of this story. We would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and please don't forget to tell us in the comments from which city or country you are watching us. Captain McVeigh coordinated defensive measures from his command tank, directing conventional armor to engage in counter-battery fire, while the flamethrower tanks retreated to covered positions. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tank deployment did not adequately account for prolonged artillery engagement, instead focusing on rapid bunker assaults followed by immediate withdrawal. The Japanese counterattack forced Marine commanders to adapt their tactics in real time, balancing the urgent need to protect vulnerable flamethrower tanks with the requirement to maintain offensive momentum. McVeigh ordered his remaining 7 flamethrower tanks to operate in pairs, one vehicle firing while the other maneuvered to safety, covering the retreat. The first catastrophic loss occurred on February 21st at 6:45 p.m. when a Japanese 105mm howitzer scored a direct hit on a flamethrower tank commanded by Sergeant Peters. The high explosive shell penetrated the vehicle's side armor and detonated inside the fuel compartment, instantly igniting 400 gallons of napalm in a fireball that rose 300 feet above the volcanic landscape. The explosion was visible even from ships at sea and created an ominous mushroom cloud, marking the destruction of 1/8 of the Marine Corps' entire flamethrower tank fleet. The crew perished instantly, vaporized by temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The psychological impact of Peter's death spread to the remaining tank crews, who now fully understood that their vehicles could be turned into crematories by a single, accurately aimed artillery shell. This loss also represented a significant tactical setback, as each destroyed flamethrower tank reduced the Marines' bunker-destroying capability by 12%. With only 7 vehicles remaining, commanders faced difficult risk-benefit decisions in subsequent operations. The weapon, which had seemed invincible during initial successes, now appeared fragile and vulnerable to enemy countermeasures. Japanese artillery observers adjusted their fire based on lessons learned from the first successful engagement, focusing on the flamethrower tanks' limited mobility and predictable approach routes to bunker targets. Battery commanders received detailed intelligence on American vehicle characteristics, including fuel tank capacity, armor thickness, and tactical deployment procedures observed over the previous 2 days of fighting. This information allowed Japanese gunners to create deadly kill zones along probable tank approach routes, forming overlapping fields of fire that could strike flamethrower tanks at their most vulnerable moments, leaving them no chance of escape. In a world where power and technological superiority seem to dictate everything, vulnerabilities can sometimes emerge that break even the most formidable might. Have you ever felt that despite all your efforts and seemingly perfect tools, you still face an insurmountable wall? That your most powerful assets suddenly lose their effectiveness, and the enemy seems to read your mind, finding every weak point? Today, we will delve into a story that will make you ponder how even the most destructive weapons can find themselves on the brink of uselessness. How do you maintain deadly effectiveness when every step is predictable and every shot could be your last? What do you do when a seemingly limitless resource dwindles before your eyes and your own defenses turn against you? And how do you avoid breaking down when everything you knew crumbles around you and psychological pressure becomes as dangerous as enemy bullets? Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription, and of course, please comment where you're watching from. It seemed that flamethrower tanks were destined to be the decisive factor in the Battle of Iwo Jima, paving the way for the Marines through impenetrable Japanese fortifications. But in reality, these machines, carrying fire and destruction, proved to be among the most vulnerable on the battlefield. Their incredible power concealed critical weaknesses that the enemy quickly learned to exploit, turning every sortie into a deadly roulette. The terrain itself was the first of these vulnerabilities. Lutz's tank, like others, miraculously survived artillery bombardments by skillfully using the folds of Iwo Jima's volcanic landscape. These natural covers, of course, provided temporary protection between assault runs. However, they also channeled vehicle movement along predictable routes, turning these paths into pre-registered corridors of death for Japanese artillery. The problem of protecting flamethrower tanks while preserving their offensive capability required extraordinary solutions, going beyond conventional armored doctrine. It was then that Lutz began coordinating his actions with infantry smoke teams, creating a dense visual screen during approach phases, which significantly reduced the effectiveness of Japanese observation posts and their deadly accuracy. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, please comment where you're watching from. But enemy fire was not the only threat to flamethrower tanks. A secondary, but no less critical, problem was a fuel supply crisis that could halt operations even without combat losses. Each such vehicle consumed an average of 60 gallons of napalm fuel per hour during active combat, completely depleting its 400-gallon reserve in just 7 hours of continuous battle. The logistical echelon required to maintain supplies exceeded the capabilities of existing shore support facilities, forcing engineers to hastily establish forward fuel depots directly under enemy fire. The specialized nature of napalm fuel also created handling complexities. The thickened gasoline mixture required constant heating to maintain proper flow characteristics, especially in cool weather, which only added to the headaches of already overburdened quartermasters. Moreover, the use of such a weapon left a deep imprint on the crew's psyche. Sergeant Martinez took command of the second flamethrower tank after Peter's tragic death, inheriting a crew that had witnessed the horrifying explosion of their lead vehicle, which had turned into a fireball, leaving no recognizable remains. The psychological trauma of operating a weapon capable of incinerating their comrades, and thus themselves, had a measurable impact on combat effectiveness. Reaction time slowed, and coordination among crew members deteriorated under continuous stress. Martinez, recognizing this threat, implemented crew rotation procedures to prevent psychological breakdown, ensuring that no individual remained at peak stress levels for extended periods during combat operations, thereby preserving not only lives but also the morale of his men. Meanwhile, Japanese defensive adaptations evolved with astonishing speed. General Kuribayashi's engineers developed countermeasures specifically designed to repel flamethrower attacks. Bunker modifications included water spray systems capable of extinguishing napalm fires, improved ventilation reducing the effectiveness of penetrating flames, and structural changes diverting liquid fuel away from critical areas. These innovations, though not implementable in all defensive positions due to resource limitations, represented a systematic effort to neutralize the American flamethrower advantage through engineering solutions, not just tactical maneuvers. It was a true technological duel, with each side seeking its path to victory. Combat engineers from the 5th Marine Division, understanding the criticality of the situation, established repair bases just behind the front lines to service the remaining flamethrower tanks. They recognized that mechanical failures posed as great a threat to these specialized machines as enemy action. Flamethrower systems required constant and meticulous maintenance due to the corrosive effects of napalm fuel on metal components and the incredibly high pressures involved in fuel delivery. Technicians worked around the clock to keep the tanks combat-ready, often performing repairs under artillery fire, as Japanese gunners deliberately targeted both support facilities and forward combat units. The tactical stalemate that developed by February 23rd vividly reflected both sides' adaptation to new battlefield conditions. Japanese forces had learned to effectively counter flamethrower attacks through improved gunnery and defensive modifications, while Marine commanders struggled to protect their vulnerable flamethrower tanks without sacrificing their offensive capability. The initial breakthrough, which seemed to promise a swift victory, gave way to a grueling war of attrition that favored the defenders' prepared positions and their internal lines of communication. The 8 experimental weapons that had altered the initial phase of the battle now represented a dwindling resource, requiring careful husbanding for critical operations. This is why Captain McVeigh received orders to preserve the remaining tanks for the final assault on Mount Suribachi, recognizing that the unique, specialized capabilities of these machines would be absolutely essential for storming the fortress complex crowning Iwo Jima's southern peak. The decision to withdraw flamethrower tanks from routine bunker clearing operations reflected the harsh lessons learned regarding their vulnerability and resilience in sustained combat. The weapon that seemed to offer easy solutions to tactical problems proved to require as much meticulous planning and resource management as conventional systems, but with the added complexity of extreme vulnerability to enemy countermeasures. The assault on Mount Suribachi began on March 10th at 06 Wika, when 5 surviving flamethrower tanks spearheaded the final push on Kuribayashi's command complex. This volcanic peak rose 554 feet above the battlefield, honeycombed with tunnels and chambers that had taken a full 8 months to excavate. Intelligence indicated approximately 3,000 Japanese defenders remained within this mountain fortress, sheltered behind 15 feet of solid rock and concrete barriers capable of withstanding direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. Captain McVeigh positioned his tanks in a semicircle at the base of the mountain, coordinating with artillery observers to identify cave entrances requiring flame treatment. Lutz's tank approached the main tunnel entrance on the mountain's eastern slope, where a 75mm anti-tank gun had held infantry attacks at bay for 3 days. The cave opening was protected by a 6-inch thick steel door with firing slits. allowing the gun crew to engage targets while remaining protected from return fire. Conventional explosives had failed to breach this entrance, and infantry attempts to approach the position resulted in enormous casualties from supporting machine gun nests located on the slopes above. The task seemed impossible, but courage and ingenuity were about to find a way. Imagine you stand before an absolutely impregnable fortress. Walls of steel and concrete, embrasures spewing death, and every approach route covered by dozens of firing points. What do you do? How do you break through where no living soul seemingly can pass? And what if you faced such walls multiple times in your life, be it in business, personal goals, or battling your own fears, and each time you've been defeated? We've all been in situations where conventional methods proved useless, and the path to our goal was blocked by something colossal and unyielding. We know that pain, that feeling of hopelessness, but today we will show how the most fortified positions were broken, and how sometimes one unconventional solution can turn the entire tide of events. In this video, we'll reveal the secrets of one of the most audacious and destructive tactics of World War II. The release 2. How could a 12-ton steel door, designed to withstand hundreds of pounds of explosives, be destroyed? How was it possible to cross 800 yards of open ground under intense fire when two previous attempts ended in disaster? And why did the Japanese engineers, who created these underground labyrinths, completely fail to account for the most obvious yet deadly threat? Prepare to learn something that will make you rethink your perceptions of possibilities and limitations. Stay with us and watch until the end, because we'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you're watching us from. On the slopes of the mountain above, where every cover became a death trap, the Flamethrower tank was the only vehicle capable of neutralizing the enemy position without unthinkable casualties. The path to the cave entrance was an 800-yard stretch of open ground, completely covered by overlapping sectors of fire from numerous defensive points. Japanese observers, hidden in caves on the upper levels of the mountain, could direct artillery fire onto any armored vehicle attempting to approach the anti-tank gun positions. This kill zone had already claimed the lives of two conventional tank crews during previous assault operations, turning every approach into a suicidal mission. Lutz, the Flamethrower tank commander, meticulously coordinated his actions with smoke teams to create a visual screen. Simultaneously, artillery batteries unleashed a barrage of white phosphorus shells on the enemy, providing additional concealment for his vehicle's movement across the dangerously exposed terrain. It was a race against death, where every second mattered. The steel door blocking the cave entrance was a true engineering marvel. It was manufactured at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and delivered to Iwo Jima in sections during the defensive preparation phase. This barrier weighed a colossal 12 tons and was designed to withstand explosive charges of up to 500 pounds. Its internal structure featured reinforcement that distributed impact effects across its entire surface, making it virtually invulnerable. Japanese engineers were confident that American forces would lack the specialized equipment to overcome such massive obstacles, rendering the cave positions practically impregnable to conventional assault. But they made a fatal miscalculation, failing to consider that liquid flame could penetrate through embrasures like burning water. And this became their downfall. Private Johnson, Lutz's tank driver, expertly maneuvered the vehicle across the crater-pocked landscape, demonstrating surgical precision. He used every shell crater and every pile of debris for concealment while maintaining the speed necessary to minimize exposure to enemy fire. The heavy 37-ton tank kicked up plumes of volcanic dust, which, on one hand, helped obscure its movement, but on the other, revealed its position to observers armed with binoculars. Soon, artillery shells began to fall around the vehicle as Japanese gunners desperately tried to bracket their target, sending geysers of black sand and steel shrapnel along the approach route. This was just the beginning, as even more serious challenges awaited, requiring not only firepower but also coolness under pressure at the most critical moment. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, please comment where you're watching from. At a mere 100 yards from the cave entrance, Lutz gave the order for his gunner to prepare for flamethrowing while the tank maneuvered into an optimal firing position. The steel door, pockmarked with bullet and shell fragments from previous unsuccessful assaults, completely filled his periscope's field of view. The embrasures were barely visible as dark rectangles on the massive barrier, but reconnaissance photographs had provided precise measurements, allowing for incredible accuracy. A powerful stream of napalm was to penetrate these narrow openings and enter directly into the chamber behind them, where it could ignite stored ammunition and destroy the entire gun crew through unbearable heat and toxic gases. The flame burst lasted a deafening 12 seconds, ejecting 200 gallons of napalm over the remaining distance to the cave entrance. The burning fuel struck the steel door, then surged through the embrasures like liquid lightning, instantly filling the chamber with flames exceeding 2,000 degrees. The anti-tank gun crew perished within seconds, overcome by superheated gases that seared their lungs before they could reach the rear exit of the chamber. The 75mm gun, which had dominated the entire eastern approach route, fell silent, its barrel glowing red-hot from the inferno that consumed its position. The destruction of this anti-tank position created a much-needed breach in Kuribayashi's defensive perimeter, which infantry companies could now exploit to reach the base of the mountain. But this was only the beginning of the breakthrough, as the main enemy forces still lurked deep within the rocks, and they would have to be flushed out one by one. Captain Shupe led his Marines through the newly created passage, using the fire-scorched rocks for cover, advancing toward secondary cave entrances where machine gun nests and mortar positions were located. The psychological impact of watching their strongest defensive position consumed by flames demoralized the Japanese soldiers in auxiliary positions. Many abandoned their posts, unwilling to face similar annihilation. This opened new opportunities, but even more cunning and inaccessible fortifications awaited, requiring an individualized approach. McVeigh, commanding the tank forces, directed the remaining 4 flamethrower tanks to the cave systems on the northern and western slopes of the mountain. Here, Japanese defenders had created overlapping fields of fire that controlled all approaches to the summit. These positions were smaller than the main tunnel complex, but equally well protected by concrete barriers and steel doors that blocked direct access to the inner chambers. The flamethrower tanks had to operate independently, as the complex terrain prevented mutual support between vehicles and limited artillery support due to overly steep angles. Each tank had to become a separate striking force, and the next target presented a unique challenge. Sergeant Martinez commanded the second flamethrower tank in this complex attack, targeting a machine gun nest skillfully carved into the mountainside at an elevation of 300 feet above sea level. This position provided an ideal view of the entire western beach area and had continuously delivered deadly fire on landing operations for 2 weeks. All infantry assaults on this cave invariably failed due to the steep approach route and supporting fire from adjacent positions. Once again, the flamethrower tank offered the only way to eliminate the threat without unacceptable casualties that could undermine the combat effectiveness of the assault companies. But how to deliver flame to such a height when physics itself presented a challenge? The cave housing the machine gun nest was excavated by Japanese engineers using advanced mining technologies they had mastered in Manchuria. Its chambers extended 60 feet deep into solid rock. The entrance was protected by a formidable concrete barrier with a firing port barely 18 inches wide, through which the machine gun could engage targets while remaining completely protected from return fire. The chamber walls were lined with steel plates to prevent collapses, creating an enclosed space designed to contain flames and toxic gases for as long as possible. It was a deadly trap, but Martinez was ready to accept the challenge. Martinez positioned his tank on a narrow ledge carved directly into the mountainside. He utilized the vehicle's hydraulic stabilization system to maintain accuracy while firing upwards at an incredible 45-degree angle. The flamethrower's elevation mechanism had been specially modified for such extreme angles, but the physics of projecting liquid fuel at steep trajectories created significant accuracy challenges that even intensive training exercises couldn't fully resolve. The stream of napalm had to arc through the air, much like an artillery shell, before striking the narrow cave entrance with sufficient force to penetrate inside. It was a shot that could determine the outcome of an entire phase of the battle. Have you ever felt trapped? In a situation where every path to retreat is blocked and the walls around you seem insurmountable? When you face a problem so monumental that any attempt to break through it feels like a futile waste of effort. This is the feeling of despair, when even the most reliable bastions of your mind or external circumstances seem ready to swallow you whole. But what if I told you there are methods capable of not just breaching, but literally vaporizing even the most fortified barriers? What if the most formidable obstacles we erect or encounter can be shattered in completely unexpected, even revolutionary ways? In this narrative, we won't just tell a story. We'll delve into events where one innovative approach changed the course of an entire confrontation, demonstrating how to crush what was once considered absolutely unbreakable. We will bring to light 3 key lessons to be learned from this dramatic chronicle, applicable to any fortress you face, be it personal challenges or global tasks. How can resistance that seems absolute be overcome? What role do psychological factors play in the outcome of such a confrontation? And what if the most impregnable barriers can be destroyed by understanding non-obvious principles? Stay with us and watch until the end, as we are just beginning to uncover these secrets. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription, And of course, please comment below where you're watching this video from. We are very interested to know the geography of our viewers. Imagine the morning. A fiery tongue, like a predator, arched in the pre-dawn sky, streaking along a calculated trajectory, directly towards the gaping maw of the cave. Its impact with the target was not just precise, but devastating. A torrent of napalm surged through the narrow opening, instantly engulfing the interior with a scorching substance. It clung to every uneven surface, transforming the refuge into a blazing inferno where fire not only devoured everything in its path, but also mercilessly consumed the air, eliminating any hope of escape. The machine gun crew holding this position was annihilated in an instant. Secondary detonations caused by exploding ammunition, about 24 rounds, illuminated the depths of the cave with an ominous glow, turning it into a superheated furnace. A strategically vital position, which had controlled the western slopes of Mount Suribachi, was wiped off the face of the earth in less than a quarter of a minute of relentless fire. This was just the beginning of a methodical destruction, foreshadowing something far more extensive. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we are just beginning to uncover these secrets. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, please comment below where you're watching this video from. We're very interested to know the geography of our viewers. By noon on March 10th, the scene on Mount Suribachi had changed beyond recognition. 5 flamethrower tanks, operating with astonishing synchronicity, had already obliterated 47 cave positions, bunkers, and strongpoints that had, until then, formed the backbone of the Japanese resistance. This systematic destruction didn't just inflict physical damage. It created extensive breaches in the defensive perimeter, allowing infantry companies to penetrate deeper, step by step, closer to the summit. However, the true effect surpassed all tactical calculations. The psychological impact of these attacks was colossal. Japanese defenders, watching their most reliable, seemingly impregnable shelters consumed by flames against which they had no effective defense, experienced profound shock. They saw their strongholds turn to ash, and this sight eroded their will to resist far more effectively than direct combat losses. But even this was not the final act in this drama of destruction. The final assault on General Kuribayashi's command bunker required the concentration of all 5 remaining flamethrower tanks. They converged on the fortified chamber, buried 15 meters beneath the mountain's summit, like the very heart of the entire defense. This position had been designed as an impregnable fortress, with concrete walls 3 meters thick and multiple escape routes connected to an extensive tunnel system permeating the entire mountain. Intelligence indicated that Kuribayashi himself remained in this chamber, directing Iwo Jima's final defense from a location he considered absolutely invulnerable. However, the flamethrower attack that ended Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima lasted 37 minutes. During this time, 5 tanks methodically destroyed every defensive position on the slopes and summit of Mount Suribachi. When the flames finally subsided, the mountain fortress, once deemed unconquerable, lay in ruins. Its tunnels were filled with acrid smoke, and its defenders were silenced forever. A weapon that just 3 weeks prior seemed experimental had proven its incredible ability to crush the most formidable defensive positions the Japanese Empire could construct. opening a new chapter in the history of military art and combat psychology.